Hello and welcome back to my channel and to another edition of Stephen King 101. Today I'm going to talk about short stories. So there's a lot of ground to cover here, so I am just going to go ahead and jump right in. But thank you so much for clicking on this video, and I hope you'll find something to enjoy. So now that you've familiarized yourself with the way that Stephen King writes his books, let's venture into some short stories and novellas. While he's obviously brilliant at long-form writing, I actually think he does his best work in short fiction. He's published over 100 short stories, so I'm just going to highlight some of my favorites in this video, but I will talk about all of the published collections he has so far. Obviously, many of these were published elsewhere as well before being put into the collection, but you can find them all in one place. He currently has released 11 short story novella collections, and his 12th, You Like It Darker, is being released in May, so that is very exciting. Now, a full disclosure on this one, I haven't even come close to reading all of his short stories, but I do have some really good ones to recommend to you, so I hope you will find something in this video you enjoy and a good place to start with reading his short stories. Now, just to clear up any confusion before I get started, there's really not a defined difference between a short story and a novella. Generally, a short story is under 100 pages and a novella is like 100 to 200, but they're honestly pretty much the same. So if you hear me use them interchangeably, please just accept it that they're the same thing in this video. But obviously, novellas tend to be longer. So I'm going to start with Different Seasons, which is the very first novella collection that I read by Stephen King. It features two stories that are the source material for some of his most famous book-to-movie adaptations, and that would be The Body, which was made into Stand By Me, and Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, which was, of course, made into The Shawshank Redemption. So this was originally released in 1982, and it has 4 stories. In addition to the 2 that I previously mentioned, this also has Apt Pupil, which also has a film adaptation, and The Breathing Method, which had its rights sold, but I think that it's kind of in, like, film development purgatory at this point, so it has not been moved through any production, and the last thing I read about it was in 2015, so we'll see if that ever gets made. So I really liked all of these stories, but my favorite of the bunch is Apt Pupil. It follows a high school boy named Todd who discovers his neighbor Kurt Dusander is a wanted Nazi war criminal and is living under a false name. Todd had recently become interested in the Holocaust and demands that his neighbor tells him like details and stories of his crimes, or else he will turn him into the authorities. At one point, Todd even gets a replica SS uniform from like a costume shop and makes him wear it and march around, which is kind of psycho behavior. So obviously, he becomes unhinged and things take some crazy turns. This is more of a psychological drama than a pure horror, but it's honestly one of the most frightening and chilling stories I've ever read. I really don't even know what else to say. This is a story that just horrified me and I couldn't put down and has stuck with me a lot. So another novella collection is Full Dark, No Stars. This one also contains 4 stories. 1922, A Good Marriage, Big Driver, and Fair Extension. This one was published in 2010, and 3 of the 4 stories in it have been adapted into films. This one falls completely into the horror genre, and it is pretty graphic at times, so definitely look into trigger warnings if that is something that you feel you need. My favorite story in this collection is Big Driver, and it's actually the only one that I can vividly recall after having read this 5 years ago. It follows a cozy mystery author who is asked to speak at a library event. Before she leaves, she is told by someone there that she should avoid taking the highway home and gives her directions on like back roads to get herself home. She ends up with a flat tire, and when a man pulls over to help her, she is abducted. This is an incredible revenge story, and I was like so gripped by it. I just want to say one more time, please don't underestimate the graphic and violent scenes in this, so please check some content warnings if you want to read this book. And while I don't remember like specific violence in the other stories. This one will be enough that I definitely recommend looking those up first. Another novella collection is 4 Past Midnight. Again, this one has 4 stories, which are Secret Window, Secret Garden, The Langoliers, The Library Policeman, and The Sundog. Now, the only one of these that I have read is The Langoliers, which I had as like a separate physical book, but I didn't really like it that much. However, I did see the 2004 film adaptation of Secret Window, Secret Garden, starring Johnny Depp, and it's just called Secret Window. And I really, really liked it. So, I mean, making this list, I really want to go read this novella for sure now, but since I didn't enjoy The Langoliers, I'm just going to talk about Secret Window, Secret Garden because the story itself is really cool. So it follows a man named Mort Rainey who retreats to his lake house after divorce and is visited by a man named John Shooter who claims that Rainey plagiarized one of his stories. Now, Rainey vehemently denies this, but before Shooter leaves, he gives Rainey a copy of this allegedly plagiarized manuscript, and he is disturbed to find that these stories are nearly identical. Shooter then begins threatening Rainey, showing up and demanding that he prove that his story was published first, and says, "You have 3 days to do this." Things escalate from there, but Rainey kind of gets into his own head and starts questioning his sanity and if he like possibly did copy this author's work. As I said, haven't read it, but I honestly can't imagine that it's not fantastic, so do with that what you will, but I will be reading this. Another one that just came out 4 years ago in 2020 is If It Bleeds. To me, the best story is easily the title story, which is a Holly Gibney story, one of King's most beloved recurring characters. We will have a whole video on different Stephen King book series where I will talk a lot about Holly, so stay tuned for that. But for now, If It Bleeds. So this follows Holly, who is a PI, and she notices that this news reporter named Chet Undowski is always like the first one to show up on a scene anytime that a crime is reported, things happen. He's always there like within minutes. She believes him to be a supernatural outsider who feeds on like the energy of the trauma. And she ends up working with Jerome and Barbara, who are 2 other recurring characters of King's, and they work together to try to stop him. Now, Holly Gibney is a favorite character of mine, so of course this was my favorite of the stories. Her first appearance is in Mr. Mercedes, which was my first ever King book, so I think that she really does hold a special place in my heart. Again, when I do my video on King's book series, I'll get much more in depth about her character, but I will say I don't recommend reading this story before you've read all of the books she's featured in unless you don't mind being spoiled. The other stories in this collection are Mr. Harrigan's Phone, The Life of Chuck, and Rat, the last of which was definitely a favorite among readers. I couldn't tell you what it's about, but I do remember really enjoying it. So yeah, this is a novella collection that I highly recommend, but again, skip the title story until you have caught up on Holly's arc. Hearts in Atlantis is his last of his purely novella collections, and I've actually never read any of the stories in this book. Now, this book's concept is really cool because all of the stories in it are interconnected, and they all have a common thread of the Vietnam War. There are 5 stories told in sequential order from the 1960s to the 1990s. It's been called a love letter to the baby boomer generation, and it has a ton of connections to other King places, stories, characters, etc. There was a 2001 film adaptation starring Sir Anthony Hopkins, but apparently a lot of the story elements were changed in so much that the title actually loses its relevance. Again, I've never read it or seen the movie, but I'm always going to recommend the book over the movie. Alright, so onto his short story collections. There are a lot, so I'm just going to give you some highlights here and there. His first one, Night Shift, was released in 1978 and contains 19 stories. The stories in this book have inspired over 20 film and television adaptations, which is insane. There's more that has been adapted from this than there even are stories in the book. The most popular ones from Night Shift are definitely Children of the Corn and Jerusalem's Lot, which is basically a prequel to Salem's Lot. The next one released was Skeleton Crew, which came out in 1985 and contains 18 short stories, 2 novellas, and 2 poems. Easily the most famous story from this collection is The Mist, which follows a man and his son as they become trapped in a grocery store after a mysterious mist settles over their town. There's also a great film adaptation of The Mist, which I highly recommend. Of course, read the book first, but the movie did change the ending, and I gotta be honest, I kind of like the ending in the movie better. It's a more morbid and it's more frightening, I think. So do with that what you will, but definitely read the book first always. Nightmares and Dreamscapes is next, which was released in 1993. This is definitely one of his lengthier collections because it contains 24 of his works and is over 800 pages long. In addition to his narrative fiction, this one also has an essay, a poem, and a screenplay. So that's pretty cool and different to see him be able to use his writing in kind of different formats than we're used to seeing. Next, in 2002, came Everything's Eventual. This has 14 stories. All of them had been published elsewhere prior to release of this collection. My favorite is 1408, which follows a travel writer who specializes in going to haunted places despite not really actually believing in them himself. So he visits the Dolphin Hotel, which has like 1408 infamous room number. There have been over 42 deaths in there in 68 years. So see how things go with that, but this is definitely one you will want to check out. Next was Just After Sunset. This came out in 2008. I have had this book on my shelf for years and I've yet to read it. Story of my life, right? This one has 13 stories, including one that was previously unpublished. The Bazaar of Bad Dreams came out in 2015, and this one is really cool because before each story in the book, he talks about what inspired it and like how he came to figure out this idea and just like overall commentary. And I just think that's so interesting because this man, he has such wild ideas and they just seem to be never ending. And so it's really cool to be able to get inside his head for a minute before reading the story and like kind of see what brought it about. Blockade Billy is my favorite story in this collection. It follows a catcher for the fictional New Jersey Titans who uses violent means to get players out. Like myself, King is a huge baseball fan, so he does include it in a lot of his stories, and I love that aspect of his writing. And lastly, as previously stated, You Like It Darker, which is coming out in May 2024. I wish it was sooner. This is gonna have 12 stories and 5 of them are previously unpublished. Something that's really cool about this one is that in it is a sort of sequel to Cujo, which, if you've watched my other videos about Stephen King, definitely not a favorite of mine. However, it's always fun to kind of read books in a world you know and characters you already know. So I'll definitely be looking forward to reading that. So that is gonna do it for this video. Clearly the man knows what he's doing when it comes to short fiction. And if you've read all the books in my previous video and you are still looking to kind of get used to his writing, I definitely recommend continuing with short stories. These honestly could have been in that video as well. Short stories are a great way to kind of get a sense of his writing without having to feel like you're committing your life away to an 800-page novel. Let me know down in the comments if you have read any of his short stories, if you have a favorite. I have been loving planning, filming, writing these King-centered videos, so I hope you've been enjoying watching them. I hope they're helping you sort of get a sense of Stephen King if you are a newer fan. I really appreciate your support. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, I would love it if you would, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!